Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is what's new in the Warehouse mobile app, Wave 2. My name is Peggy, and I'll be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days, and all attendees will receive a notification when the recording is available. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout today's session. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Nicole Gump, Senior Program Manager. Nicole, over to you.
Thanks, Peggy, and welcome everyone. With me today, I have my colleague, Zach Greenvoss, Principal R&D Solution Architect. And as Peggy said, what we're going to be covering are some of the new features that have been released in the Wave 2 2021 timeframe that we are technically still in here, even though it's now 2022. So hopefully you're looking forward to the presentation today. So let's go over our agenda. We are going to do a brief overview of the features that we'll be covering in detail later in the presentation. I will be doing demos throughout of each of the features. And then we will have some time toward the end for some live Q&A. So please post your questions and your comments, as Peggy said, in the chat window. Okay, so let's go through an overview of each of the features that we're going to cover today. All of these are now generally available. The first set of features was actually generally available with the beginning of our Wave 2 2021 release, which was 10.0.21 in October. And that includes our reason codes for adjustments, the support for GS1 barcode scanning, as well as the ability to customize the step titles and instructions. And with the later release in the wave of 10.0.23 that was just made generally available in January, so last month, we have a couple of new features that we are especially excited to present to you today. So those include the promoted fields on the Warehouse mobile app, as well as the app detours. So that's our ability to pause tasks, complete a secondary task, and then come back to our main task. So we'll be going through each of these in depth. And as I said, we'll be doing demos for each of these features as well. So let's start with the reason codes for adjustments. This feature, along with some of the other ones that were mentioned from the earlier time frame in the wave, we have covered from a high level in our What's New Tech Talk series. But as I said, we will be demoing all of them today, which is not something we have done for all of these features in the past. So hopefully you find this review useful. So the reason codes for adjustment, the feature name that you'll find it under in the feature management workspace is a mouthful, and it is post on-hand adjustments using configurable reason codes connected to offset accounts. So this one, when you enable the feature, it allows the user on the mobile app to select a reason code for the count or the adjustment that they are performing. And each reason code that is available for selection can be tied to a specific offset account. So this allows you to assign an account that is different from just the default inventory posting profile that was used during these processes in the past. So this is actually an extension of a feature we introduced before around the cycle count reason codes. And this is an extension just for the ability to specify the offset account. So that's really the new part of this feature. So for each of these features, you'll see that I've included a reference link to the official docs article. And these are all very well documented features for not only the setup, but there's also great examples that you can follow along and set up and test for yourself as well. So I have a screenshot here on the right-hand side that shows our warehouse mobile app and what the view might look like for a user who is doing an adjustment out of inventory to see the cycle count reason code. But we're actually going to go through a live demo as well. So let's switch to the live demo. So I actually want to start with showing you not just the demo of the feature in action, but some of the configuration behind the features as well. So for this new, offset tied to the reason code, it actually lives in the inventory management module. And let me collapse my view here so I can walk you through. Under setup and under inventory, we have several new forms that are available actually with the feature enabled. And the first one is the reason codes themselves. So when you open the counting reason code form, you'll be able to define the reason code, a description for the code, but then, this is really the main part of the feature, which is to be able to specify a specific offset account for that reason code, which will then be used when posting those cycle count discrepancies or those inventory adjustments from the warehouse mobile app. Okay, so this is really the heart of the feature. But a couple of other forms that are related are your cycle count reason code groups. And this simply allows you to create a group of a subset of those reason codes that you have defined. And that kind of helps filter out the reason codes that are available to the users and some of the different workflows on the mobile app. So you can see here for the adjustment in process, I've only selected this reason code of found inventory. But for the adjustment out, I might have several reason codes. I've got a damaged, expired, or a stolen reason code that the user can select. So in addition to grouping those reason codes, we have one more thing that's important here, and that's our counting reason code policy. This is really just a binary policy. It's either an optional or mandatory policy that you include the reason code when the adjustment or the cycle count discrepancy is posted. So if it's optional, that code does not have to be specified. But if it is mandatory, the journal will not post without the reason code being defined. Okay. And I'm going to walk you through where this is set because we have a couple of different levels. So if we switch, I'm going to switch into the warehouse management module. And again, I'm going to collapse for some clarity here. So let's go to setup and under warehouse and our actual warehouse level setup, we do have the ability to define that cycle counting policy for the entire warehouse. And you'll see it if you scroll down here under inventory and warehouse management. There is a cycle count reason code policy, and it is assigned actually at the top under the warehouse tab, the setup group, and then the counting reason code policy. You have a drop down of those policies that we just looked at for the configuration. So I have said that, any adjustment to inventory in this warehouse has to have a reason code. So I have made it mandatory. But there is an override for this, right? If that's too broad, we actually have this setting at the released product level as well. So again, let me collapse. Let's go look at just one of our released products. And you'll see, actually without clicking into this, this was available on the overview grid page as well. But under the product tab, setup group, you've got the counting reason code policy. Again, you can see for this A00 item that I will be working with in many of the demos today that I did not assign a specific reason code policy. So if I make an adjustment for this item, the system is going to use that policy at the warehouse level because I don't have anything defined here. So it will be mandatory that I assign a reason code. Okay, but if I go to another item, let's check our A002 item. I actually do have a reason code policy assigned, and that is that for this particular item, it is optional that I assign a reason code when I am doing adjustments. So that will override that mandatory setting. So even if I'm in Warehouse 24, in my USMF legal entity, I'm working with all Kintoso data here in my demo environment. So if I post for this item, even though I'm in the warehouse where it's a mandatory policy, it is actually going to be optional, and it will post without a reason code just for this item because this overrides the warehouse level setting. Okay, so that's everything related to the setup. Let's go ahead then and look at what does this actually look like from our warehouse mobile application. So here is our app. I'm going to go ahead and do, first of all, let's look at a spot cycle count. You'll see some of my other features that we'll be talking about later kind of popping up here. I'm going to enter a location that's in my warehouse. It is going to show me the item that's in the location, the license plate that's in the location, and ask me for the count. I have my my slider here that I can use, but also the kind of the calculator view as well. You can see I entered a count of 5. That is different than the on-hand quantity because it is asking me to recount. This is a configuration in the mobile device menu item itself for how many times you want to ask the user to retry their count if it does not match the on-hand value. In this case, it's just one retry, and that just gives the user the ability, you know, in case they accidentally entered the wrong number, or maybe they truly did count incorrectly, they can kind of recount before it is submitted. So I'm going to go ahead and just enter the same count. I'm going to say that, no, I really did count just 5 in that location. So it's going to accept my count now. It's going to ask me if I want to add anything additional. If I have found something on the shelf that it did not prompt me to count. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say I'm done counting. And you'll see that it said my work is actually completed. So if I switch back to the system, I'm going to go back to my warehouse management and look at our work. And what I should have now, because that count was different than what was expected, I have cycle count work that is in a pending review status for that location that I was just counting. So if we go into the cycle count form, so now instead of the worker in the warehouse who was on the mobile app doing the count, I'm performing the action of a supervisor or an inventory auditor that would be reviewing the discrepancy of the count. So it is showing me that we expected to have 12. That's what's on hand in D365, but the user only counted 5. So here's the impact to my cost if I go ahead and accept this user's count. And you can see that in that process, there was no reason code available for the user to select. That is by configuration, and I'll show that to you as well on the mobile device menu item. And that's just because in an ad hoc count like that spot count, you know, the user may not know the reason code for the adjustment, or even that there is a discrepancy. They may just be counting it because they came across an empty location, a damaged aisle, something like that. But as the supervisor, I can go ahead. This is my A002 item. Even though my inventory in my warehouse says that I need a reason code, here I can select one, but I also don't have to because I gave that particular item an optional reason code policy. So let's go ahead and try to accept this count, and you'll see that it said my journal was actually posted with no cycle count reason code. And again, that's because this particular item said that it is optional. So let's kind of follow this process through. I'm going to show you back in inventory management, it is always a counting journal that is posted. And that is one of the limitations we had with being able to specify a particular offset account. And that's why we've introduced this new feature. So you'll see if I look at all the posted journals, the last one that I have in my list is uses the work ID of that cycle count for the description. And if I click into the journal, I want to show you that this is from that discrepancy that was posted. And also, if we did select a reason code, or even if you're just manually creating a counting journal to post, that it is available on the line details with this feature enabled. Okay. So let's go over the mobile device menu item setup that kind of drove that process I just walked through. So in warehouse management, under setup and under mobile device, if we look at the mobile device menu item for spot counting, for any item that is related to cycle counting, you have a subform that you can open for additional configuration. So if I click on cycle counting, here is that number of attempts that I mentioned for doing the recount. But here at the bottom is where you see the additional fields that are related just to this feature. So again, as I mentioned, for this particular workflow, it doesn't really make sense to display the counting reason code to the user or to make it editable to them. So I have no default set, and I have actually chosen to just hide the reason code in the workflow. And let me show you, we're going to go through one more example for an adjustment. I'm going to go right back to that form, actually, mobile device menu item, and show you the setup for the adjustment, because it looks a little bit different. In this case, it's not a cycle count, so I don't have this form, but you'll see that it shows up the same fields within the general tab for the adjustment out and also the adjustment in work creation process. So if you have an item that uses adjustment in or adjustment out, you will see these additional fields in the general tab. Okay, so you'll see that I also here have the ability to select that reason code group that we talked about at the beginning of the configuration. So that allows me to say, you know, what subset of all the reason codes do I want to display? And then what is the default? Here for an adjustment out of inventory, I am actually going to set a default. And I'm going to go ahead and display it. It displays at the line level, meaning after each item that's counted or adjusted. And then I am going to go ahead and let the user just edit that default. Because if they're doing an adjustment, you know, maybe our business says, you know, 80% of the time that's because the product is damaged. But we want the user to be able to select a different code if that's not the reason in the other 20% of the time that they're doing the adjustment. So seeing this other setup, let's go ahead and go back to our app. I am going to back out of our cycle counting option, and I'm going to move to that adjustment option. So now, if I want to adjust out of inventory, I'm going to go ahead and enter another location. It's going to ask me which inventory am I adjusting out. I'm going to enter a license plate that I have in this location. Okay, and here in the center, you can see that it is giving me the default cycle count reason code. I can click into this and see the full detail. So it's telling me it's filling in damage by default, but I can edit this value. So if I came across something and say maybe it was actually expired, maybe it's a batch controlled raw material in a production facility, and I have found something that's expired, I'm going to go ahead and pick that reason code instead. So I'm going to go back. You'll see that it updates from the default to my selection. I'm actually going to, instead of adjusting everything out of here, and maybe I only found like one box on the pallet that was expired, so I only need to adjust out a partial quantity, and it's going to let me do that. So you'll see that it said that the work was completed. Let's go back one more time to our system and look at what happened from an inventory posting perspective. So the item counting journal, again, if we look, clear our filter for what has been posted, we have one more journal where that 190 was on hand. I adjusted out the 15, so now we have 175. And again, if I scroll down to the line detail, you can see where that counting reason code that I selected of expired was captured. Okay, I am going to show one more thing related to our counting setup, and that's actually maybe actually a couple of things. One is that I just want to point out, because I mentioned it earlier, that so under our warehouse management setup, inventory adjustment types, this is kind of our standard setup that we have always had in place for cycle counts and adjustments. And this is where it is tied to a counting journal type. And there is no other type of journal, like an adjustment journal or movement journal, that you can select here. And that's why we previously did not have this ability to specify an offset account. But you can see now as well that directly from this setup, I can define also a default reason code for this adjustment type in this configuration form as well. So you can see that this is pretty pervasive, right? We've got a lot of places in the system where we see this new default reason code and a lot of different configurations that it is touching. Let me see if I can find one more thing for you that I want to point out before we move on to our next feature. And that is just back in inventory management under inquiries and reports. You also have a counting history. So you'll be able to see all the items that have been counted, and the reason codes as well get captured here. So this one, if I click, you can see that on 131, I did an adjustment for this item and I used the expired cycle count reason code. Okay, and we can see the worker, that is the worker that my mobile device user is tied to. So this was my user, and I have all the available information. So if an inventory auditor comes in and is looking for specific history of what has been adjusted, you have this counting history to reference as well. Okay, so that was a lot on the counting reason codes. Let's go back and move on to our next feature. So the next one is the support for the GS1 barcode scanning. This is something we actually introduced just prior to the Wave 2 2021 timeframe. So this, I think, was actually late summer, early fall 2021. But it is one of the features that was the most popular idea out on our ideas portal for a long time. So the product group has, finally given us a standard feature and support for these GS1 barcode scanning. Okay. So when we enable this, again, it's just allowing a user to scan a GS1 barcode with the mobile app to extract multiple pieces of data from a single scan. So that GS1 barcode format is just our global standard for exchanging data between different companies. And also, what we can do is define application identifiers that tell the system the meaning of the different data elements that are in the barcode. So again, we've got a pretty good reference document out there, and these links will be available when this slide deck is posted with the presentation. So the screenshot on the right is just showing the module level parameters that are available. And again, we'll go through the setups in the live demo. So let's switch back to our environment, and I will go right to that form. So warehouse management, setup and warehouse management parameters. So that's what I was just showing in the screenshot. On the general tab, under the barcodes fast tab, we have got all of these new fields that are enabled with the GS1 feature. So we've got the FNC1 data matrix and the QR code characters that can all be defined. One or two can be defined. Essentially, they can be used in parallel for different types of barcodes or QR codes that need to be scanned in your business process. And then we want to set a group separator as well. That's just telling us, what is the character that's separating the different data elements. You also have the ability to set a maximum length for the application identifier, although you'll see there's some other related setup to the identifiers as well. So that's just the module level parameters, and then we'll look at the other settings that are enabled with this feature. If I scroll all the way to the right in our warehouse management setup menu, the very last form is our GS1 form. And so these are the other new configurations that are available. If you click in, let's just go through them in order. The GS1 application identifiers, the easiest way to kind of get this up and running and to test it is to just come in and create the default setup. That will give you this list here. So it's got the application identifier, some of our standard, data elements that we'd be working with, and whether or not they're fixed length, what the length is, if it's numeric, alphanumeric, or a date, if it has a decimal place. And then this is a newer parameter that is actually not documented in the docs article yet. It needs to be updated, but with this release, you have the ability to include the application identifier in the scanned value. Meaning if I had an 18-digit SSCC ID and I include the application identifier, it's going to prepend the leading zeros to the SSCC ID in the scanned value. So there are some use cases for that, which is why we've included it here. I'm only pointing it out because it's not in the documentation yet. So just be aware that that's been added. So let's go over the other configurations. We've got a GS1 generic setup. And this is really our mapping of those application identifiers that we just looked at to the individual field options from the warehouse mobile app. So again, easiest way to do this is create default setup. It gives you this list here. If we filter down maybe by the, let's look at the 01 application identifier, that's the GTN code. You'll see that it is used in this standard mapping for both an item ID scan or a product confirmation scan, which is essentially another item scan. Okay, so this is just your mapping. The previous form and this one can be edited from, the default setup. So if you need to add, a new value or change one of these, you certainly can. And the last form is around the GS1 policy. This is important because this will be tied to the warehouse mobile device menu item where you're actually going to scan with the device. And if you do not set this, the default behavior is the standard behavior of the app where even if I scan the barcode, it's going to take a single input value, right? It won't parse out all of the different data elements from the barcode. So again, this has a default setup where there's a few different examples. If we look at the purchase receiving one, which is the example we're going to go through, you can see that my different data elements include the expiry date for the batch. So I'll have the batch ID and its expiry date, and then also the quantity that I'm going to be receiving. I'm going to point out that there's a sort code. The reason it is 0 across the board here is because it is only used or needed if you have the same field in the policy more than once. So if you had something like an item ID more than once, or a product confirmation more than once, then you would need to identify the sorting, or, the sequence within the workflow, essentially. So the sorting works much like our work priority, right? Where it goes from 0 to 100, with the lower value being the highest priority. So if this is a 1, it would come before something that I set as a 50. All right. But again, only needed if you're using the same field more than once in the policy. So before we jump to the app and actually go ahead and scan something, let's go back to that setup mobile device menu item, and actually look at we're going to be using the purchase receive option. So here under the GS1 policy is where you link that setup that we were just talking about to the actual menu item. I'm actually going to remove it, because we're going to look at what does this process look like without the ability to have a GS1 barcode scan. And then we're going to put the policy back and see what it looks like with that available. Okay. I believe I have a purchase order already in the system. So let me open all purchase orders from accounts payable. And I am going to use, this purchase order has got my test item that I set up for GS1 scanning. And I'm going to bring up my app. Let me get out of my adjustment. Okay. I'm going to back up to my main menu, and I'm going to go into inbound, and I'm going to do that purchase receiving option. Okay. So it's asking me for this PO number. That essentially also be a scan. So it's asking me to scan the item here. If I don't have the GS1 barcode, I'm going to have to just, enter the item number. Mm-hmm. I might be using a physical or touch keypad on the device. So, lots of room for potential error. And then it's asking me for the quantity that I'm receiving. Let's just say I'm receiving 3 of these. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. It's asking me to confirm that. So I've got another okay. And now it's asking me for the batch. I'm just going to enter a batch number. And now it is asking me to confirm that. And now it's telling me that my work is completed. Okay. So there were a lot of scans there to enter the item, enter the batch, enter the quantity for that receipt. So if I go back to my mobile device menu item, I'm going to go back to that purchase receive option. And I'm going to go ahead and set that GS1 policy so that I can enable essentially the GS1 scanning with all the other configuration we looked at kind of in play here. And then I'm now going to be able to parse out all those data elements from that policy. So the batch, the expiry date, the quantity. So I am going to go back to our app. I'm still... Actually, let me go, I'll go right back to the beginning of the workflow so we can see purchase receive. We're going to enter that PO number again. And now, instead of that item number here, I'm going to do a scan of my GS1 barcode. So you're going to see I've got this lengthy value. It's got the group separator that I identified in the parameters. Followed by the application identifier. In this case, this last value is the expiry date, which is in a year, month, day format. And with this scan, what I should see is it took my item number, it put in my quantity. I'm just going to say, okay. It's going to tell me my work is completed. So there were a lot less scans, and I can actually go back and show you. Let's look at from that PO kind of what happened there in the background, just to show you that we really did get that batch and expiry scanned. So if I look at the work detail here, here's my last one for the 30 quantity that was defaulted from my barcode scan. And if I go and I look, let's go to this item number. I'm going to bring up the on-hand inventory for this, so then we can see the batch number as well. Okay, let's filter down the warehouse 24 and I'm receiving. So my batch number was 3,300. That was in my scan. That's the last one here at the bottom. You can see it's in my receiving location reserved because I've got open put away work. But if we look at the batch number itself, you can see that the batch record was created for 3,300. That was in my scan. And the date, the expiry date that was in my scan as well was 220502. So that's 5222. So you can see that with that single scan, I got the item, the quantity, the batch, and the expiry, and that really sped up my receiving process pretty significantly. Okay, so that's our GS1 barcode scanning. Let's go back and talk about our next feature. So custom step titles and instructions, we actually did a short demo on this in our last What's New session, but I'm going to cover it again here because it's the foundation for our newer features that we're going to be talking about today. So the feature name is Warehouse App Step Instructions. And when you enable this, it's allowing the warehouse manager or supervisor or admin, whoever's in charge of maintaining those mobile app workflows to create custom titles and instructions for the users to reference. And you've been seeing those kind of pop up in my demos already. So it's really aimed at easing the training process for any new workers that you may have in the warehouse, but also maybe temporary workforce that you're bringing in for maybe a seasonal, spike in your warehouse operations. So you can give them a mobile app and kind of let them, be self-guided through the workflow if you've got all the appropriate, step titles and instructions that they would need. So this kind of serves as your SOP. It does have a pop-up and you can say, don't show me this instruction again. So once I am confident with that workflow, I can say, don't show me that instruction again, and it won't pop up every single time because you do kind of have to click out of that dialog box to dismiss it each time that you're in the workflow if you do not click the don't show again box. Again, we've got some good documentation on this out on the doc site. So I'm going to switch to the demo to quickly go over this. With this feature enabled, we need to go to warehouse management. We need to scroll over here to setup, and under mobile device, we get a new form called mobile device steps. This is going to give you an overview. Again, similar to some of the other setups we were looking at for the GS1, we have a default setup, and that will generate the entire list here. And these are all standard. If I modify any of these, say I wanted to update the item ID. If I go ahead and update this record, it's going to update it for every workflow where the item ID is referenced. If I only want to update it for a particular workflow, I can do that by saying add step configuration. And say I only want to update that purchase receiving workflow that we were doing. So I'm going to say, okay, and it's going to take me into a record that is now specific to purchase receiving and the item ID. Okay. You can see it's filtered for my user language here of English US, and I have to click this view translations in order to edit it. And you can see it's showing me kind of the default, and this is the one specific to purchase receiving. So maybe for the purchase receiving, if I'm using that GS1 barcode scanning, I may want to say scan barcode here because that's, the expected behavior for my users. So they have a GS1 barcode that they're scanning for the item number and some additional information. So I'm going to update all of these to say, scan the barcode or confirm the barcode instead of item number. So this just gives me the ability to kind of use language that is maybe more appropriate for my business process versus just the standard, lexicon that we have for the product. So now that I've updated this to say confirm barcode for my purchase receive, I'm actually going to be able to see this. Let's go right back to that purchase receive. You can see it said scan item. That was the previous behavior. If I go out and I go back into purchase receive, I can enter that same PO number we were working with. And you can see now that in this purchase receive workflow, it says scan barcode instead of scan item. Okay, because I have just customized it. So that is the foundation for that. Let's go back to our demo. And this is one of our brand new or very new features, and it is called Warehouse App Promoted Fields. Same name for the feature there. And when you enable this, it allows, again, whoever the administrator is for the warehouse app workflows to choose which fields they want to promote on the workflow and additionally highlight. So you're essentially selecting a subset of all the available fields that might be displayed to the user and saying, these are the ones that are important to focus on. And if you highlight one of the fields, it gives it an additional icon in a bold colored font that is meant to really draw the user's attention to that particular field. Okay. So again, as I just said, it's really just helping the worker focus on the most important information they need to complete the task that they're in. So there is a prerequisite here. As I just mentioned, the reason we went through the warehouse app step instructions feature again today is because it's really the basis for this feature and the app detours that we're going to be talking about next. So you have to enable that warehouse app step instructions feature to use the warehouse app promoted fields. Okay. If you have this warehouse app step instructions feature enabled because it was available in an earlier release, and you now want to enable and use the promoted fields feature, you have to regenerate the default setup in the step instructions because there are some new values in that list. And you won't see the correct behavior when you're trying to set up this new promoted fields feature if you do not regenerate that default setup. Okay. And again, we've got a good reference document that you'll be able to have the link to here. On the right, I'm just showing from that warehouse app step instructions form, there is a new fast tab for the promoted fields. And kind of this is what the subform looks like, or at least partially, but we'll get into the live demo here and look at it as well. But here's what that full kind of subform looks like. You can see this is just kind of a static view before we get into the live demo of, in this scenario, I have selected these 4 different fields to be promoted and one of them to be highlighted, which is the location. On the left-hand side on my screenshot of the app, you'll see that I don't actually see all 4 of the fields that I promoted. And there is actually a mention of it here in the setup form. Just depending on the size of your display and your device that you're on, you may not actually see all the fields that you selected to promote. And that's just a function of the display size of the screen. But when it's highlighted, again, as I mentioned, it has that icon. It's a star next to the field name, and then it is a bold blue font versus the white font of the non-highlighted fields. So let's look at it in the system. So again, we're in the mobile device steps form. And so I'm actually going to just continue to work in this form. I'm going to clear some of my filters here. As I said previously, if you have already been working with the step instructions feature and you now want to use this new feature, you want to come in here and click Create Default Setup again to regenerate this list, because you're going to be missing some step IDs and some records if you do not regenerate it after you enable this new feature. Okay. I'm going to look for an example where I have got some promoted fields configured. And you can see that even on this overview grid, I can see which particular records have promoted fields configured. So that's a nice kind of quick view. So I'm going to go into this license plate ID step for my sales picking workflow. And if I click on the step ID, that always takes me into the record. And I'm going to go down to, again, we have a new fast tab called Promoted Fields, and it's going to tell me what I've currently selected. And in order to see that subform, I have to say Select Fields. So here is one of the behaviors you'll see that it may not look correct if you don't regenerate the default setup. This may be blank. You may not see any values popping up in here. And that's going to be an indicator to you to go back and regenerate that default setup and then come back in here and you should see these available fields now. Okay. So if you see that issue, that is the root cause. So here you can see I've got all the available fields and I have selected 4 of them. Again, I've got location, item, the item description, and the inventory status. And I've chosen to highlight the item. So I can unhighlight it. That's just a function of the button here. And I can, highlight a different one by just selecting that record and saying highlight. I can move these up and down in priority. I can move them back and forth or move all values back and forth with these buttons as well. So a pretty easy navigation, similar to what we see in the mobile device menu setup with the actual menu structure for the app. So fairly user-friendly here. I'm going to go ahead and say, okay. And if we want to go look at what this looks like on the app, I'm going to go to my work list. I'm going to look for some sales order work that we have because that was specific to the sales picking flow. I can see I've got some open sales order work already here. So I'm going to scan one of these work IDs into my app so that we can see what these promoted fields look like. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of purchase receiving, go back to our main menu. We're now going to go to outbound and use that sales picking flow. It's going to ask me to scan that work ID. I just copied it from my list there. And right here, you can see I have got, again, only a subset, 3 of the 4 promoted fields I selected because I've got a fairly small kind of, call it phone size display for my device. And it is highlighting that product description or product name for me. So it's giving me that star icon. It's giving me the bold blue font. And actually, I reordered it as well so it comes before the actual item number. So if that's the most important thing that I need the user to make sure that, A001 looks very close to A002, but one's a 6-foot cable and one's a 12-foot cable. So they need to make sure they verify that they've got the 6-foot cable, then maybe that's why I'm highlighting this. Okay, so that is our promoted fields function. I'm going to go along here. We're getting close to our time. I want to make sure that there's some time for questions. So let's go through our last feature that we have to talk about today, and arguably one that many people have been waiting on for a very long time. So this is our warehouse management app detours. Same name for the feature to enable it. When you enable this, as I said at the beginning, it's allowing you to pause a task that you are performing, go into the detour, which is a secondary task, and then return to your previous task without losing your progress, right? So in the past, we've heard the feedback that, if somebody starts to pick an order and they get to the picking location and there's an issue, they have to cancel out of that picking work and essentially lose their progress, and also maybe lose the work assignment to their user, and somebody else may pick it up while they're kind of investigating whatever the issue was in the location. So this allows you to not have to abandon that task anymore. You can actually just pause it and then complete the detour and come back. So you can actually also pass information from the two workflows back and forth. So that just increases the efficiency. If you're picking, you can pass the location into, say, a location inquiry. If you're looking for a particular license plate in that location, that's the example we're going to go through. And then you can pass that license plate that you find back to your sales pick so that you don't have to scan it again. Okay, again, same prerequisite that we mentioned in the last promoted fields feature, which is that you have to have the warehouse app step instructions feature enabled to use this. Again, the configuration kind of lives within that same form. And we've got some good documentation again out there around the detours. Again, just kind of a static view here of what that looks like from the step instructions form. We have a new fast tab for the detours and a sub menu that's going to allow you to select the data that is sent to and received from the detour to the main task. So we're going to go through a kind of an example here before we jump into the live demo. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through a sales picking task. So if we read this graphic kind of from the upper left-hand quadrant and then around clockwise. So if we're completing a sales pick and I'm the user on the mobile app and I arrive at the picking location and maybe the license plates are damaged or missing or facing the wrong way where I can't scan them easily, then I may want to pause my picking task and go to a detour task, which is a location inquiry to find a license plate that I can pick. So I can send the picking location that I'm in to the detour so that I don't have to re-enter it in the inquiry. When I'm in the inquiry, I'm going to see a list of the available license plates. So again, an assumption here, I'm in a license plate controlled picking location. When I select one of those license plates, it's going to pass it back to my sales picking task, again, so that I don't have to just remember that license plate value and type it in and risk maybe mistyping it. And then I can just go ahead and complete my sales picking task with that license plate that I have now looked up from location. So here's what it looks like in a static view. So if we have this location inquiry set up as a detour from our sales picking task, on the app, as you go into the detour, what it's going to look like on your available actions menu is our normal location inquiry icon, which is kind of this pin with a magnifying glass. But we know it's a detour because it's indicated by this return arrow over the icon. Okay, so that's what it looks like in the list. And then from our setup, we have said we're going to send from our sales picking task the location, and we're going to paste that into our location inquiry detour. So here's what it looks like on the app, right? This was my picking location. It is now in my location inquiry detour. And then this is what the detour looks like once I've entered that location. It's showing me all the available LPs. And if I pick one, and now based on my setup down here, I'm going to bring back from that detour that license plate value into my sales picking task. And you can see that here. So here's the value that I selected in the detour. And then I can just move on with my pick. So if we go back to the demo, I'm going to bring up the app. Actually, let me show you quickly before we go into that setup again. So let me close out of here. I'm going to go back to, again, same setup form. So warehouse management setup. We scroll over. We're in mobile device and mobile device steps. I'm going to filter again just for where I've got my specific setup. Again, like the promoted fields, I also have the ability to see which steps or tasks have a detour configured. So we're going to look at this location inquiry first. So if I click into this step ID, again, I see there's my promoted fields. And then below that, I now get another new fast tab with the app detours feature enabled. And this is telling me what is the detour. And then if I say select fields to send, which fields have I decided to send to and bring back from the detour. I will point out that not only can you add multiple potential detours from the same step, but you can also add multiple fields that may be passed or brought back. So this is kind of a one-to-many structure with the detours and with the sending of the fields back and forth between the tasks. Okay, so I only happen to have one here configured for this task, but we are going to go look at what that looks like. So I'm actually in that sales picking task that we scanned previously to look at the promoted fields, but we can use it for this scenario as well. In order to see the detour option, I have to go to my ellipses here on the left-hand side. And again, you'll see that this option is my detour. I know that because it's got this return arrow that's going to bring me back to this task after I do the location inquiry. So if I click location inquiry, again, this is my step instructions that's popping up. If I never want to see this again, I can say, don't show me that again. But here's the confirm location. So instead of me having to enter the pick location I'm in, it's already defaulting based on that configuration. I'm just going to say okay. And then here are my available LPs. I've got 4 of them. I'm going to pick this 24. And then I'm going to go back to my sales picking task, and you're going to see what it did is pass in my license plate value of 24. And I'm going to say okay. And then I can just go on with my task, right? I'm only taking 6 pieces out of the 175 that I have. So it wants a target license plate value, but then it's going to allow me to complete this to the bay door. Okay. So that's my detour. Pretty slick. Let's look at one more thing. If we've got just a minute here, because I want to show you kind of another way that this detour might work. If we start from a location inquiry on the device and we find product that we want to move, this is what this scenario is. So if I go into my location inquiry step and I look at my detour is configured for a movement, and I look at the fields that I'm sending, all I'm going to send into the movement is my license plate. And I'm not actually bringing anything back to the inquiry in this scenario because it's an inquiry. My workflow doesn't require me to pass back any information. That inquiry only needed the location as an input to begin with. Okay. And I want to point this out because there is a behavior that I think is new on the app as well with this feature enabled. So let's go back quickly and look at if we go to inventory and we go to location inquiry, if I scan a location, I'm going to do my floor 001. Again, here is my kind of card view of all the license plate that are available. If I click, I have to long press, if I'm in a touch screen, or long click if I'm on my Windows version here to see the detours. I don't believe that was available prior to this feature in this app release. So make sure you're keeping your app version up to date. And then also with this feature, like you saw me do, long press brings up your detour or other available actions. So you can see that from the inquiry, I now can do a movement by template. It's going to pass in that license plate that I clicked on so that I can move it. And it doesn't like my license plate ID value there. So bad example for trying to complete the movement, but you get the idea of the detour being available and having to do that from kind of the long press to see the detour. Okay, that's what I wanted to point out there. So that is the end of our presentation on the features. I know we're right at the top of the hour. Zach, I'll ask if there's a quick question you want to bring up here live.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So we were wondering if there was anything on the item configuration specifically, like on the product configuration, that needed to be set to support GS1 128 scanning.
No.
Yeah, I think the answer is no. Like unless you needed to specify a specific, right, barcode, right? But other than that, there's nothing that's needed for the scanning itself.
No, and the reason is maybe let me quickly bring up the environment here again. The reason is because it's controlled instead of kind of, our old thinking of having to have a barcode value already in the system in order for the app to recognize it and be able to scan it. This is really controlled by that GS1 setup, and specifically when we're talking about items, it's going to be around these application identifiers, right? So whatever you are using, whether it's SSCC, GTN, a different identifier, as long as the product, the kind of the format in the barcode meets this setup, right? The length and the type, and it meets the, essentially between that and the mapping under the generic setup, that's going to tell the system, right? Like I looked at before, that if we look at 00, that's used for a whole bunch of things, 01, but that's like our item ID identifier. So as long as you've got this 00 or 01, and then your little separator, and then the product number, the app recognizes it because of this mapping as an item ID. So there's nothing that actually needs to be done on the item itself.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm going to put up my contact information as always. Feel free to reach out if we didn't get to your question. Apologies, but hopefully you enjoyed the demos. So I will pass it back to Peggy to wrap us up.
All right. Thank you so much, Nicole. So if the attendees could have a quick look in the Q&A panel, I've posted a link to a short survey. We would love to hear what you thought about today's event and hear what you'd like to see in future events. So as a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalk Community Dynamics page within 5 business days, and all attendees will get a notification of that. So a big thank you to Nicole and our audience for joining us today. Have a great day or evening wherever you are.